In the heart of a forgotten valley, surrounded by dense forests and silent mountains, lies a tranquil lake shrouded in dark secrets. They say it calls, and those who hear its call never return. This is the story of a family searching for peace but finding a nightmare instead. Tom, the father, was a man marked by time. His disheveled brown hair was streaked with gray, and his deep eyes carried both determination and an unshakable worry. He believed that returning to the lake of his childhood would bring his family peace, but he was wrong. Sarah, his wife, was cautious and protective. Her clear blue eyes seemed to notice everything, as if she could sense danger before it appeared. She hesitated to visit such an isolated place but trusted Tom, at least for now. Alice, their 12-year-old daughter, was far too curious for her age. Her bright green eyes seemed to see beyond the visible world. She always noticed what others overlooked, a gift that could be both a blessing and a curse. And Danny, their 8-year-old son, was the embodiment of innocence. Always clutching his little toy car, he brought light to every room with his youthful energy. But even he wasn't safe from what the lake concealed. The trip started peacefully. The car wound its way along a road flanked by towering trees whose canopies blocked out the sunlight. Tom was excited. That lake had been his refuge as a child. He wanted to share this piece of his past with his family. But Sarah didn't share his enthusiasm. From the very beginning, something about this place felt wrong to her. Maybe it was the growing silence or the suffocating sensation that came from the trees pressing in around them. Alice asked if it was true that people had disappeared near the lake. Danny laughed and said it would be amazing if it were haunted. Tom just smiled and said they were old stories, nothing more than tales meant to scare children. The village looked frozen in time. Old houses with broken windows stood silently as villagers cast wary glances at the newcomers. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she spotted pale faces peeking out from behind filthy curtains in abandoned homes. Alice noticed something else. The villagers didn't just seem suspicious, they looked terrified. The bell rang 3 times in the distance, its sound echoing from an abandoned church at the center of the village. No one explained what it meant, but every villager paused for a moment before resuming their activities as if nothing had happened. The cabin sat at the edge of the lake, hidden among twisted trees whose shadows seemed to shift with the wind. It was an old structure, its walls made of dark, weathered wood with small windows covered by dusty curtains. Inside, the cabin was even gloomier. The floor creaked with every step, and a musty smell hung heavy in the air. There were only 2 small bedrooms, a living room with ancient furniture draped in white sheets, and a cold fireplace filled with old ashes. Danny ran off to explore while Alice stood by the window staring at the lake. She found it strange how still the water seemed, as if it were waiting for something. The first night at the cabin arrived with an unsettling silence. The family was exhausted from their journey and uneasy about their surroundings. Danny was the first to go to bed, clutching his toy car as he yawned. Sarah insisted on locking all the windows, but Tom laughed it off, saying there was nothing to worry about. As everyone slept, something began to stir in the darkness. At first, it was barely noticeable, soft footsteps on the wooden floorboards of the cabin. Then came the whispers. Danny woke up to the sound. He looked toward his window and saw it slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. But that wasn't all. Outside stood a figure among the trees, tall and motionless. He heard the whisper again, clearer this time, "Danny, come." Like any curious child, he moved closer to investigate. And then, he vanished. The next morning, Sarah went to wake Danny up but found only an open window and his blanket discarded on the floor. Panic set in quickly. They searched every corner of the cabin and around the lake for him, but Danny had disappeared without a trace. Tom ran into the village in a frenzy, begging for help. But the villagers deliberately ignored him. They avoided eye contact or shut their doors before he could speak. Finally, a hooded man pulled Tom into a dark alleyway. His voice was low and urgent. "You need to leave now," he whispered. "They've chosen you." Tom tried to make sense of what he meant, but all he got was a finger pointing toward the lake before the man vanished into the shadows. Tom returned to the cabin with no answers and found Sarah sobbing uncontrollably. Alice sat near the cold fireplace hugging her knees. She hadn't spoken a word since Danny disappeared. Alice was next to hear the lake's call. That night, while Sarah tried desperately to fix something on their car so they could escape, Alice heard whispers. They came from near the lake, soft at first but soon impossible to ignore. She tried to resist them, but something seemed to pull her outside. When Sarah realized Alice wasn't inside anymore, she ran after her into the dark forest. But before she could reach her daughter, Sarah felt invisible hands grabbing her arms and legs. She screamed as she was dragged into the shadows. Tom knew where he would find his family, or at least their bodies. He followed distant chanting until he reached the edge of the lake. The villagers were gathered there in black robes under torchlight, their voices rising in an eerie harmony as they performed some unholy ritual. In the center of their circle stood Sarah, Alice, and Danny, motionless like statues with empty eyes and skin too pale to be alive. When Tom tried to run toward them, a hooded figure blocked his path. "You don't belong with them anymore," said the figure coldly. "The lake has chosen them." With no options left and fear consuming him entirely, Tom fled into the dark forest as chanting echoed behind him. Years later, Tom told his story in a rundown bar to anyone who would listen. He claimed he left his family behind because he had no choice, but no one believed him.